AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word SHOW to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word SHOW, S-H-O-W, to 33777. Text SHOW to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
Greetings, welcome. It's Eric Erickson here across the nation, 877-973-7425. If you want to be on the program, you are more than welcome to. Text Eric, E-R-I-C-K, to 33777. Get the show notes and all. Listen, if you're on the phone, stand by. I promise I will get to you. We've had a lot to cover here, and I got to get to the Epstein stuff that's not the Epstein stuff, because it's really important. I need everyone here to understand how the Epstein stuff is played out. And if you're a longtime listener here, you know the truth, even if you don't want to acknowledge the truth. There never was a list. There are people. There are victims. There are people who victimized the victims. And in that sense, there should be a list of names. But the rumor has always been Jeffrey Epstein had a list of people to blackmail, and the government had that list. And Pam Bondi and others fed into it, saying she had the list on her desk, if you will recall. Or confirming when John Roberts at Fox News said, you got a list on the desk, I've got it here right now, implying there was a list. And this is a problem because I've known all along there was never a list. And how did I know there was never a list? Because I listened to the victims and their lawyers. And the victims and their lawyers have said all along there was never a list. And the victims and their lawyers have said there are names and there are victims. The reason we don't know the victims is because the victims were paid lots of money by very wealthy men for non-disclosure agreements. We've had members of Congress, you will recall, say they were going to produce the names. Don't forget that. That's very important here. You've had a number of members of Congress who met with the victims, and with those victims then came out and said, we're going to, from the floor of the House, where we're protected by the speech and debate clause, we're going to name the abusers. And they've never done that. And it's very important you recall that they've never actually done that. We don't know the names. We should know that the victims clearly talked to members of Congress and divulged names. We should have the names. We should. We don't, and there's never been a list. And yet, over the years, social media influencers who wanted you to believe they had insider knowledge kept telling you there's a list, and the list is coming, and there's a deep state conspiracy. And remember what happened? Pam Bondi trotted all those people to Washington. Many of them felt like they were taken advantage of. They didn't want to pose for that photo op. The binder that supposedly had all the information, and what was the information? It was all very old information, much of it redacted, but a good bit of it actually wasn't redacted. It was just old information that had come out. It's a real problem. Now, further problem. Let's talk about the Biden pardons. Joe Biden pardoned a lot of people. Joe Biden pardoned family members. The last day he was in office, he pardoned, Hunter and his brother and all sorts of people, Dr. Fauci, Liz Cheney, all these people he pardoned. He was afraid Trump would come after him on a revenge tour, so he gave them pardons. And we now know that the pardons, most of them were issued with an Autopen, not with Joe Biden's signature. And in the process of them being issued with an Autopen, Republicans are now raising concerns that maybe those pardons not only aren't valid, but that Joe Biden himself was too incompetent to issue the pardons, and so someone else issued the pardons, and the pardons should be invalidated. Tim Burchett from Tennessee has requested that Pam Bondi invalidate and make void Joe Biden's pardons. You can't. And here's what's going to happen I can see this is going to become Epstein 2.0. See what happened with Epstein 2.0? The Republicans kept saying, oh, there's a list, there's a list, there's a list, there's a list. They get into office, they don't release the list. And now the Democrats say, oh, Donald Trump must be on that list. They've got a list, and Donald Trump's a kid toucher with Jeffrey Epstein. It's all Donald Trump, blah, 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 blah. And now you have all of these partisans of the left who didn't give a damn about the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, who only care now because they can toy with Donald Trump and say he must be on the list. They said they'd release the list, and there's no list. You can't invalidate Joe Biden's pardons because you have to show that Joe Biden didn't have the competence to issue the pardons. And who are you going to get to do that? Are you going to get his doctor who covered for him? You can't, because he took the Fifth Amendment, and you can't imply anything from the Fifth Amendment. You and I can say that's proof that Biden was competent, but legally you can't. In a court of law, you can't. In a court of law, you can interpret nothing from the Fifth Amendment. Is his wife going to say Joe was incompetent? Of course not. What about his son? No. His chief of staff? No. His vice president? No, she's still not. His White House press secretary, she's on a revenge tour of the Democratic Party, insisting he was fine the whole time. So who are you going to get to say Joe Biden was incompetent? Because though you may not wish to believe, and the chattering class on other conservative talk radio shows and television shows and the internet refuse to acknowledge it or pretend ignorance or deny it, the truth is legally, if Joe Biden consented to the use of the Autopen can be used, even for a pardon. It's a legal issue that Sam Alito himself had to look at when he was a Department of Justice attorney. Sam Alito actually wrote the authoritative memo on this when he was a lawyer. Are you going to get Sam Alito to reject his prior work? He actually is the expert on the use of the Autopen. He's the one who studied it the most, and he had to as a lawyer. And he concluded if the president designates someone to use the Autopen on his behalf for anything, including a pardon, it's legal. So you can't throw it out because it was the Autopen. You have to throw it out because Joe Biden didn't have the capacity to give his consent. And how are you going to prove he didn't have the capacity to give his consent? How are you going to prove that? You're not. But here's what's going to happen. Because they can't help themselves. The Democrats and Republicans alike, they both back themselves into corners trying to play to their base for fundraising. I actually did the Remnant interview with Jonah Goldberg for his podcast yesterday, and Jonah Goldberg said he actually has a bigger problem with small dollar donors than the large donors, because the small dollar donors, if you get them in waves, they can lead people down crazy paths. He's more concerned with them, and I'm not sure that I agree with him on that, but you do have a lot of small dollar donors who were convinced that Jeffrey Epstein had a list that needed to come out. And what's going to happen is you're going to have a bunch of small dollar donors who are convinced the pardons have to be invalidated. And the Democrats are going to start saying to these people, just like they did with Epstein, why do you think Pam Bondi won't void the pardons? Do you think maybe it's because she's been bought off? You know, she's bought off by Qatar. What if the Biden team bought off Pam Bondi? That's what they're going to do. The Biden team is going to have revenge through the Democratic Party on Republicans who push this idea that the pardons need to be made void, and they're not going to be made void. And the Republican leaders, the Republican lawyers, they know you can't do this. They know what the law is. Or put it to you this way, they know what the law most likely will be, because the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on the issue, but we know where Sam Alito's head is. Now, if you want to know the law, if you weren't here yesterday, let me explain this one to you Let's back up. This goes back to English common law. Before we were a country, we descended from the English. And so when we run out of law from 1789, we go back before 1789, we look at English common law. And what did the English do? And where does the pardon power come from? Where does the pardon power come from? The pardon power comes from the powers of the King of England. How did the King of England administer pardons? It was an executive office. The king is the executive branch of government. The president is in the United States. Remember, they wanted Washington to be king, and he declined. That's why we have a president. Where does the pardon power come from? It comes from the kings of England. How did the kings of England use the pardon power? They placed their seals on pardons that were drafted by other people. Did the king personally place his seal? No. Other people placed the king's seal for him. He directed them. He had the capacity, and he said to the Lord Chancellor, affix my seal to the pardon. And the Lord Chancellor would affix the king's seal to the pardon. Fast forward, what is the closest approximation? The president uses a signature, not a seal. The Autopen is akin to the Lord Chancellor affixing the king's seal to the document. The president says to his secretary, sign my name for me. This plays out as well in American commercial law. You know, I hated being a lawyer, but I was a really good contract lawyer. In the commercial code, Section 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code, I was a great lawyer when it came to that stuff. There's an entire section on writing checks. And you know, I've got a signature, you've got a signature, but if you take a piece of paper, you just sign an X to it, that's your mark. That's your signature, and you're bound by it. But also, if you get your wife to endorse the back of a check for you and sign your name for you, you're bound by that. You can't come back and say, wait a second, now if they sign it and don't have your consent, that's a problem. But if you tell your wife, you get your government refund check in the mail, you get your tax refund in the mail, comes in the form of a check, and you tell your wife, just sign my name too, and she does, you're bound by it. She's not in legal trouble for signing your name. You consented to her doing it. It's the same thing with the pardon. If the president tells the secretary, the chief of staff, the attorney general, the White House counsel, use the Autopen for me, well, then the president's fine and they're fine and the pardon's valid. So again, you've got to prove his lack of capacity. And how are you going to prove his lack of capacity? None of his lawyers are going to challenge him. None of his doctors are going to challenge him. His wife's not going to challenge him. His chief of staff's not going to challenge him because that's going to put them in legal jeopardy for other things. At best, they're going to take the Fifth Amendment, and you, again, in a court of law, can't apply anything from the Fifth Amendment. At worst, they're going to lie and say he had capacity. You and I, and this is the point, and this is what frustrates people about the law, but the law is there to protect you as much as it is everybody else. You and I can look at Joe Biden and say this man did not have capacity, but if everyone who was with him on a daily basis assured you in a court of law under oath that he did, you cannot challenge that. The Republicans cannot challenge that. And so this big congressional hearing about the use of the Autopen, if Congress is not going to pass a law that bars the use of the Autopen, there's nothing they can do. And if they do pass a law that bars the use of the Autopen, constitutionally, that only applies moving forward, not backwards. You can't pass a law that says no Autopen use and then have it invalidate pardons that were issued before the Autopen. But you're going to get the conspiracy theorists in here. I can see it happening. It's Epstein 2.0. They're going to come in. Why did these people not get rid of the Autopen? Why did they not get rid of Joe Biden's pardons? Why did they not invalidate the pardons? They did not invalidate the pardons because they're bought off by the Democrats. They're actually tools of the Democratic establishment. They're sleeper cells for the Democrats. That's what they're doing. That's what they're going to do. You know it and I know it, and there are going to be a lot of easily manipulated people who, just like the Epstein list, now think there's an even greater conspiracy. You're going to have these people buy into a conspiracy theory because the Republicans are playing with fire on this stuff. The easy answer is to come out to the cameras and say, the Autopen can be used if the president consents. Everyone says the president consented and that he was in his right mind, and I disagree with them, but it's going to be legally impossible to change, unfortunately. And that's the truth, the God's honest truth. But you can't actually fundraise off of that. It's easier to send a letter saying, I'm going to get Pam Bondi to throw out the pardons. Send me money to make it possible. And people will do that. And then when you don't actually get it done, you can hope they forget. But in this day and age, the way the internet works, you're going to have conspiracy theorists coming after you instead, and you will have unleashed something that you will not be able to contain, and really you'll be getting what you deserve, but you never should have started it in the first place. Hello and welcome. It is Eric Erickson here, 877-973-7425. Michael, let me get to you. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm fine. I'd like to give prayers to you and your wife and your whole family.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. My question is that the Supreme Court, if they say that Trump can't do the tariffs for his economy, his whole economic policy seems to be based on tariffs. What does he and his administration pivot to as a policy if the Supreme Court strikes this down? What does he go to?
Oh, my gosh, that's a great question. This one's a little bit complicated, but I can actually do this in a little bit of a nutshell for you, Michael. The president could still use tariffs. The problem is the emergency powers the president used don't actually give him the power to do tariffs. They give him the power to regulate, and no president has ever used that emergency rule for tariffs. They've used similar provisions that have been amended by Congress to stop it. However, the Smoot-Hawley Act is still around, and the president could pivot to use the Smoot-Hawley Act. It's a little more complicated. It gives Congress a little more say in the process. He could probably get the Republicans to go along with it, but it's using the emergency powers was his path of least resistance, and it was his way of doing them very quickly. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the Supreme Court strikes it down, and the reason is very simple. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, divides the powers of Congress in Section 1 is tariff, Section 3 is regulation, and the Supreme Court has long held that if you say a word like regulation, that means you're citing Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, not Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. You got to say something about taxes, duties, or tariffs in order for Congress to be clearly delegating that power. That's a well-settled precedent by the Supreme Court, so I think the tariffs probably are going to be thrown out for that. We'll see. I suspect we're going to get a Clarence Thomas decision, and it might be unanimous. We'll see how it goes. But the president is going to have to pivot to something else or just get rid of the tariffs, which would be the best thing because there are signs in the economy we're having problems with them, including at Chipotle of all places. And ketchup sales are down. Now, let me tell you about Americans for Prosperity because they're trying to advance common sense conservative reforms around the country, including economic reforms. You go to AFPvolunteer.com. AFPvolunteer.com, and Americans for Prosperity can get you involved in the process as a conservative activist, teach you how to be a conservative activist, but they can also just make you the most informed person in your circle of friends, giving you updates on the play-by-play of common sense conservative reforms around the country. Great organization, and they can keep you engaged and informed. You go to AFPvolunteer.com today, sign up. They advance things like school choice, the president's tax plan, deregulation for small businesses, permitting reform in Congress, the REINS Act in several states that reduce regulatory burdens put on you by bureaucrats. A great group. You should be involved with them. They've got chapters in every state. AFPvolunteer.com. Sign up with them today. Hello there. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program. Actually, you know what? We had to close the phones, so you can't call in. Now, you're asking, why do we close the phones? Because, he's going to find out in the next little while. So my longtime producer, Charlie, has always bragged about his golf game. And I've never played golf with him, and he's always come up with creative excuses to not play golf. So this past year when I turned 50, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to make him go with me to Las Vegas and play golf. So I took him on a golf trip with two other friends of mine. I hate to admit it. He was a really good golfer. He actually was. Even not sober, he was a good golfer. He made some impressive shots. He also plays with 40-year-old golf clubs that were his grandfather's. I had to rent him clubs in Vegas because he was like, these clubs, so he was really good with new clubs. So I actually made him leave work for a meeting. And when he gets to the meeting, it's a golf pro who's going to fit him for new golf clubs, and that's going to be his Christmas present. So it'll take him a couple months to get them built, so he'll have them in time for Christmas. And he doesn't know, so he will show up at this meeting to meet this particular person, and when he walks in the door, it's going to be a golf fitting. So occasionally I'm a good boss. Occasionally. The downside is that I'm then going to get my butt kicked by him even further when he gets new golf clubs. So in any event, the phones are closed because my call screener is on his way to get golf clubs and has no idea. All right. I got to talk about the Qataris. It actually is it's a problem. The Qataris gave Donald Trump a 747-800. The current Air Force One is a 747 that began being built in the late 1980s, was brought into service, I think, in 1990, 1991. George H.W. Bush was the first president to use it, and there are two of them. They buy two of them. One is Air Force One, one is Air Force Two. Air Force One is whatever plane the president is on. If the president of the United States climbs aboard a crop duster tomorrow, that crop duster is designated Air Force One. But Donald Trump wants a new jet, and the Boeing has been building a new jet. But the Boeing process has been convoluted. It's taken forever, and Boeing is a company in decline, sadly. So the Qataris had a 747-800. Contrary to what the Democrats said, the Qataris were selling it anyway. Ironically, it was because the Emir of Qatar upgraded to a Airbus A380, the big double-decker plane. So the president gets a 747-800. Now, here's what they have to do with the 747-800. They have to strip it down to the skeleton. They have to make sure there's no foreign intelligence surveillance equipment on it. And then they got to turn it into Air Force One. That means the missile defense system has to be put in. Yes, Air Force One has a missile defense system. It's got to have the communications arrays, the satellite arrays put in it. It's got to have all the trappings of Air Force One put in it. It's going to take a while. It's not going to be ready until Donald Trump is just about out of office. Qatar gifted it to the president, and I don't think the president should have accepted it for this reason. Qatar has blood on its hands throughout the world when it comes to funding terrorism, particularly anti-American terrorism. The Qataris have funded Hamas. They've coddled al-Qaeda. They've given safe haven to al-Qaeda and the Taliban and more. They've got blood on their hands. And so the president of the United States will be flying on a plane bought with the blood money used to kill Americans. And I don't think he should have done it, but he did. I say all the time, and it really makes progressives mad, that I'm okay with I disagree with the president flying on this particular plane, but I'm okay with Donald Trump being the president to do it because I actually don't think the Qataris can buy off Donald Trump. I think he's probably one of the few people they can't buy off. The problem is the Qataris are buying off everyone else. And the genius of them giving Donald Trump the 747 is that all of the people who hate Donald Trump will now ignore the entire influence operation of the Qatari government, and they will just point the finger at Donald Trump. In fact, I'm seeing this happen today. In this monologue, I said on social media that this monologue was coming, and the number of people who are like, but Trump. Yes, that's my point. They are trying to influence Donald Trump, but it's not just Donald Trump. It actually is much bigger than Donald Trump. It goes beyond Donald Trump. Eitan Fischberger is a reporter. He covers Qatar, among other things. He has written for the Wall Street Journal. He's uncovered a series of posts in which a prominent advisor to the Qatari prime minister and a spokesman for the foreign ministry has openly called for Tel Aviv, Israel to burn and has praised suicide bombings. On the night terrorists fired over 100 rockets into Israel, Majid Mohammed al-Ansari tweeted, "Whenever morale weakens, strength fails, the nation becomes divided, and its enemies become more emboldened. Until victory becomes a distant dream, Palestine comes to remind this nation of its glory and the greatness of its message, and that victory is in the hands of God alone. So praise be to God for his good tidings." In one blog post, al-Ansari praised the Second Intifada, the Palestinian terror campaign from the early 2000s against the quote-unquote Zionist enemy and its martyrdom operations, which is a euphemism for terrorist attacks. He credited the Intifada with leading Israel to pull out of Gaza in 2005. He's repeatedly called Donald Trump a racist. After ISIS massacred 130 people in Paris in 2015, he posted, quote, "A world that permits Bashar and Sisi to kill their own people, turns a blind eye to the crimes of the Zionists, and carries out drone bombings will inevitably reap the consequences." So he hates Bashar al-Assad, but he also hates Sisi in Egypt. He doesn't like al-Sisi. The Qatari regime harbored the 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. The Qatari regime is throwing money at Republicans and Democrats alike. Pam Bondi was a paid lobbyist for Qatar. I believe I read Kash Patel was. There have also been a number of Democrats who have done so. And now they're sinking their grip into the newsroom at CNN. Elena Johnson at CNN. Let me read you the series of tweets. She's the editor-in-chief of the Free Beacon. Meet CNN creators, the completely, totally, absolutely not sponsored in any way new show from a, quote, team of digital native storytellers as they navigate the stories that matter most. The first episode features 4 little-known CNN reporters and producers gallivanting through Doha's Souk Waqif market, where they marvel at stray cats and try on traditional Qatari perfume. While CNN has not released ratings from the inaugural creators episode, commenters are weighing in. Quote, "This is so cringe it hurts." The top comment on a YouTube cut of the show shows, "My algorithm has failed me," another user wrote. "Cringe, infantilizing," said a third. "I'm sure this show will have hundreds of views," a fourth predicted. The show is raising eyebrows inside CNN, where some staffers have questioned whether this was a quid pro quo with Qatar. Dylan Byers of Puck reported on Friday. CNN says it's nonsense. The network told Byers and the Free Beacon the editorial content is completely controlled and funded by CNN. The oxymoronic claim that the editorial control content is funded by CNN, while facilities and technical support are funded by the Qataris, would make little sense to anyone with an understanding of television news production. Even allowing CNN's euphemistic use of the phrase facilities and technical support, Qatari subsidization of the production costs would, according to any established American news organization's editorial standards and practice, be sponsored content. It was an advertorial, that is, an advertising editorial about Qatar. Did CNN suspend its editorial guidelines for Qatari funds for the purpose of a studio with custom workspaces designed to enable dynamic content creation and collaborative, spontaneous work among a team, as CNN described it? What is CNN getting from Qatar in exchange for this hard-hitting editorial content? They're getting something. CNN and Qatar signed a contract. There's even a picture from the Free Beacon. CNN International Vice President Phil Nielsen with the C Media City Qatar Chairman Sheikh Abdullah bin Ali Al Thani at a signing event. They expanded in Qatar. Qatar, by the way, funds Al Jazeera. And Al Jazeera has been actually working overtime to deny genocide by Islamic fundamentalists in Sudan against Christians and in Nigeria. Al Jazeera has been pushing Western commentators to deny that the genocide is happening, that the genocide is so bad, as I mentioned yesterday in Sudan, you can from satellite see pools of blood, massive pools of blood on the ground where the Islamic fundamentalists are murdering Christians in Sudan. And Al Jazeera says, don't believe your lying eyes, and it's funded by Qatar. There's a growing wave of anti-Semitism on the right, and more people believe Qatar is funding the anti-Semitic campaign on the right, funding these bloggers and podcasters on the right. Qatar is funding Democratic politicians and Republican politicians, giving Donald Trump a plane. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing the growth of anti-Semitic coverage and anti-Semitic voices becoming more and more prominent on social media, growing on social media clips and on YouTube. I do not think it's a coincidence at all. You know, you can buy follower accounts to get yourself real big and get attention. How many followers is Qatar buying for some of these people? You should be concerned about this. I know it seems like an esoteric topic, but here's why it's a concern. There is growing hatred of Jews in the American press and American political commentary on the left and the right. I got asked this by Jonah Goldberg in his Remnant podcast yesterday. Where do I think it's coming from? And I really don't have an answer for it other than Qatar is spending a lot of money inside the West in an influence operation. And one of the things Qatar tries to influence is views of Israel, because Qatar, remember, is more aligned with Iran than any other country in the Middle East. In fact, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt have all kept Qatar at arm's length because the Qataris are flirting with the Iranians more and more. What if Qatar is being used as a proxy for Iran? Hezbollah is no longer useful to Iran. Hamas is no longer useful to Iran. What if Qatar is the new Iranian proxy and no one even realizes it? They kept al-Qaeda terrorists safe. They have provided safe haven for the leaders of Hamas. They have provided safe haven for leaders of the Taliban. And they throw money at American media entities and politicians and influencers to avoid them asking those questions and talking about it. I think you as an American citizen need to be worried that a fundamentalist terror-sponsoring regime is buying off American politicians. And I think you as an American citizen need to be concerned that an Islamic fundamentalist regime that has sponsored the terrorists who have killed lots of Americans is throwing money at social media influencers. And I think you need to be concerned that an Islamic fundamentalist regime that is throwing money at politicians and throwing money at social media influencers is now throwing money at major American media outlets to help steer and direct editorial coverage of not just that country, but the Middle East. If you're worried about the money of the pharmaceutical companies, and you're worried about the money of George Soros, and you're worried about the money of the Koch brothers, you sure as hell should be worried about the money of the Qatari regime. Qatar is now throwing money at CNN. It has given Donald Trump a free airplane. It has sponsored social media influencers on the left and the right. It is a regime that is hostile to Christians, hostile to Jews, and very supportive of Islamic fundamentalist terrorism. You should be curious as to where all of their money is going, and if the rise of anti-Semitism we're seeing on the right and the left online is funded by Qatar, because my suspicion is it probably is. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. Glad to have you with me. The phone number is 877-973-7425. I'm sorry, that's by habit. You can't call in. My call screener has left to get us Christmas present. Little does he know. We got a lot more to cover when we come back. Have you all heard about the Wiccan, the witch, the witchcraft practitioner Donald Trump is nominated to be Surgeon General? It actually is a big issue. Also, I gotta, when it comes to Qatar and Islam, there's a very famous picture from 1979 during the Iranian Revolution, and it is two Iranian girls. They're in a car. They were left-wing activists who supported the overthrow of the Shah and the return of Khomeini, the Ayatollah. And they're in a car One dangling out of the front seat window, the other out of the back seat window. They're together holding up a picture of the Ayatollah. They're celebrating his arrival. The Shah has fled. The girl in this picture in the front was executed by the Ayatollah a few months later. The girl in the back, to this day, lives in Sweden in exile. They celebrated the collapse and overthrow of the Shah and the rise of the Ayatollah as a champion of progressive values. And he killed 30,000 of his left-wing supporters after he got into office. I'm telling you, the progressivism is a mental health issue, and they are willing to make alliances with those who will kill them later, so long as they're killed after the conservatives and the capitalists. They try to justify these things, and the Iranian Revolution should be a reminder to everyone that you cannot coddle Islamic fundamentalists. They will come for you, and Qatar is funding operations to downplay Islamic fundamentalism that will come for all of us and came for over 2,000 Americans on September 11, 2001, and we should not be allowing it to fester through the deposits of money into checking accounts, as is happening in too much of this country right now. Now, when we come back, we got to move on to witchcraft and the witches who want to take over Washington, D.C. Yes, witches are coming for us, the real ones. First, I got to tell you about Vision Computers. You want somebody who can work magic on your computer? That's Vision Computers. How's that for a segue? You call them at 404-COMPUTER. You go to visioncomputers.com. They can build you computers, and if you get them to build a computer, you get their world-class tech support completely for free. But if you want managed IT for your computer, if you want a laptop, a desktop, whatever you need, they can take care of you. And their managed IT services can not only save you money, but have you in touch with actual human beings instead of AI chatbots. You go to visioncomputers.com or call them at 404-COMPUTE. 404-COMPUTER, visioncomputers.com. You tell them Eric sent you. You can save some money, but also you get their support. And your employees get actual human beings to talk to. They actually get a special phone number where they can call them, and in 15 seconds or less, you can actually get some human being on the phone instead of an AI chatbot. Your company stays productive, your employees stay up and operational, and they're experts on their computers, or they're experts in their jobs, not their computers. Vision becomes their computer experts. Call them at 404-COMPUTE or go to visioncomputers.com. When we come back, double, toil and trouble. We've got witches coming to D.C., but they're saying MAGA and Maha, so all the Christians are being awful quiet about Donald Trump putting an occult practitioner in the Surgeon General's office.